Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also thank you very much, Aurélien and the team, for organizing this second workshop here. We were very much looking forward to coming here, and as you can see, many people from Lausanne took the train or the airplane, or were running here, or took the bike. I don't know exactly, but anyway, more people show up here than on our Friday meeting in the morning, which is impressive. Okay, so thank you very much for this organization, and thank you very much for all of you for coming here. And this here, he will follow us through this presentation. His name is Leonardo. As you can see, he is rendered a little bit for 2023. And Leonardo also said once that simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. And that's a little bit the theme I would like to talk about. And if you talk about sophistication, and if you look at the protocols that are proposed by Chris Kramer in one of the recent protocols papers in JCMR, then you can see there is a lot of legwork to do in order to do cardiovascular exam. Now, granted, not all of these different scans have to be acquired to answer a certain specific question, but nevertheless, this is a complete workup of possible scans that are required to look at the heart. Okay, but if you look at how much time this takes and how complicated it is to do all that, then first of all, you have to put on the EKG electrodes. It doesn't always work. You have to futz around with them. If you are at 3T, then you have to ask the patient to hold his or her breath, which is not always at the same level. You have respiratory drift. So this is all relatively complicated. And if you look at how many SCOUT scans you need to finally get to the short axis, this is just simply crazy. And every single one of them requires a breath hold. Every single one of them requires a slightly different orientation and a slightly different position of the imaging plane, and many mouse clicks. I don't bother you with my mouse click story, but at the end of it, you finally get to this image, but you're already 12 or 15 minutes into the scan when you finally see that. Now, some people, including myself, have squandered their youth with looking at 3D imaging of the heart. The question was, couldn't we go from 2D to 3D? And back in the days, of course, there was the glorious navigator, which accounted for respiratory motion. So the navigator is, for those of you who don't know what it is like a little MR image that is acquired prior to the image data. And this little MR image, you look where the lung-liver interface is. And if this lung-liver interface happens to fall into end expiration, then the subsequently acquired data are accepted for reconstruction. But if you look at this a little bit more closely, and I show it as a matrix because many of you in the room are engineers, if you look at the heartbeat on the one hand and the respiratory levels on the other hand, then you see that only in mid-diastole and at end expiration, there are data acquired. And if you look at the AD converter, how much time is the AD converter of a $1.5 million or euro machine actually collects data? It's 2% of the time. So I think this is a big waste of time and money. And Leonardo says, you gotta be kidding. So what we have done in response to that, we have worked on what we call the free running framework. And since not everybody is familiar with it, I will introduce it, what it means. It dates back to this paper, to a student of mine who had the idea to just keep pulsing regarding where the heart is as a function of the cardiac cycle or the respiratory cycle, just keep collecting data and then worry about when in the cardiac or respiratory cycle they were acquired after the fact. And what he did, he programmed this sequence here based on a sequence from Davide Piccini, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. So the data are just continuously acquired with this radial acquisition that is rotated by the Gonford angle until the whole entire K-space is filled. Just as a little disclosure here, every little dot on this surface is the beginning of a readout. It would go through the center of K-space and come out on the other side. Now, of course, the advantage of this is you can select a subset of data within this acquisition very freely. And as you can see, many of these subsets of data are actually quite homogeneously sampled. But now, how can we separate this into cardiac and respiratory positions? Well, you add total self-navigation, and luckily, Jérôme Yerli, is he here? No, he's not in the room. He will now would tell me, no, Mattias, we don't do it like that anymore. But the story is just told like this, where we just collect data from these case-based acquisitions, and through different approaches, we can then extract a signal, which you can see on the right-hand side. If you look at this frequency spectrum of these signals, you can tease out a respiratory and a cardiac signal, which you then can use to inform the reconstruction. And how does this work? Well, we take this data set and then we just simply dilute it according to the respiratory and to the cardiac position. And thanks to some magic, which was implemented originally by Jérôme Yerli, we can then reconstruct such images where no gating was required, where no breath holding was required. And this is an isotropic spatial resolution of 1.1 millimeters. Okay, now as you can see, you now can go in retrospectively, fully retrospectively into these data and tease out whatever you want. You can go through the cardiac cycle, you can go through the respiratory cycle, but you could also go into the data set and look at the mid-diastolic image and at end expiration and go through the anatomy as you wish, fully retrospectively. Okay, and these are data that are acquired at our institution from our pediatric cardiologist colleagues using fermoxetol. And you can see on the left-hand side, you can see the different respiratory positions. You can see how the heart moves as a function of time. And you can also see the anatomy on the right-hand side. You can see the coronary arteries that are reformatted. And here there is a patient with an anomalous right coronary artery in the region of the arrow. And for me, this was just simply stunning that this was possible without breath holding, without EKG, to get such information, such high resolution. And here you see the happy cardiologist after such a scan. And Leonardo says that he never thought that this would have been possible, of course. And these are images that were given to me by the next speaker, by Salim Si Mohamed, who took some time and did some volume renderings of this. And if you look closely, you can even see the coronary arteries through the heartbeat here, which is quite unique for MRI, that you have a 3D acquisition with a high spatial resolution and where you can go through time. And Leonardo says, holy cow. Okay, and these are some data that were given to me by Giulia Rossi and from Chris Roy. Usually what we do acquire is a full echo in case space, and on the right-hand side, you can see this patient, which was actually only 6 months old, with pulmonary artery banding. And then she implemented together with Chris this UTE sequence where you only start sampling in the center of K-space and then you go out in K-space, which leads to a much, much shorter echo time, which gives much less rise to dephasing through the rapid flow. And you can see in the region of the red arrow, you can see this band very, very clearly on the UTE version of the image, whereas on the upper image with the general gradient echo readout, there is every now and then there is a signal void, and you cannot assess anymore whether this vessel is patent or not. We have then also modified this sequence together with the Northwestern University in Chicago to add flow to it. Now we can also do flow imaging, flow quantification with this. And the beauty of it is the scan efficiency is 100%, not like for 4D flow where you have to depend on the navigator efficiency of the respiratory pattern of the patient. Here you just always have 100% scan efficiency and you know exactly how long that scan is taking. Then Ruud and his team use the same sequence while it's interrupted for injecting different T2 prep times to then get to these beautiful 3D renderings where you can see a T2 map as a function of time and as a function of space on the right-hand side. And Augustin was the champion of this, who reconstructed these images. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the pilot tone, and I think Mario Bacher, I'm almost forgetting his name, where is he here? We'll talk a little bit more about it, I think, in a later talk. But basically what it is there is a transmit coil which transmits a signal with a certain frequency. There is a receive coil, of course, which also acquires the same signal. However, as soon as there is a heart beating in the field of view, then the signal that comes out of the receive coil on the right-hand side is modulated, as you can see. And if you then look at this modulation, and very, very similar to what I just showed you, you can look at the spectrum of this, you can filter this out, and you can get to a cardiac and to a respiratory signal with which you can do all kinds of things, including informing our compressed sensing reconstruction by doing the binning procedure, so just exactly like I showed you before. But simply what we do, we exchange this self-gating signal from the case-based data to the pilot tone signal that is coming out to then inform the reconstruction. And that gives us a couple of advantages. Now we can all of a sudden decouple the case-based trajectory from the gating or from the binning of the different positions. And this allows us to do something like what Mariana was doing here. She was calling it synapse. She first acquired a data set with high spatial resolution, which was then immediately followed by a flow acquisition where the TR and the T, etc., is different. So if you were to do self-navigation with this would be a little bit difficult because the self-navigation signals wouldn't be exactly the same. However, the pilot tone really doesn't care about what sequence you are using. You can very accurately gate the signals to the different positions and then generate such images here. And if you care to think about the graph on the right-hand side, it also shows you that it's more accurate in identifying the flow. Now we come to Bastien, who's sitting here in the front row. Bastien really didn't take any crap. Bastien looked into the reconstruction, into the gridding. He looked into compressed sensing, and he even extended it with motion compensation and total temporal variation. And he really looked at all the math. He had kilometers and kilometers of white sheets on his table with the math on it. And he just didn't believe what people were writing. And he got it right. I think he's the first person on the planet who got this reconstruction really right, down to the very last comma of the math. And if you look at this here, the images at the very bottom, I don't know how well it projects, but his version of the XD grasp, which includes motion fields and temporal total variation, I was just flabbergasted when I saw this, how sharp the interface is now. And this can now simply be plugged into our reconstruction framework. And unfortunately for us, fortunately for you here in Bordeaux, Bastien is leaving us. And well, what he did before he left, he wrote this book chapter, which I think he called Little Wolf, right? And which basically explains part of his reconstruction approach, not all of it yet, but a big part of it. So if you're interested in how he did that, how he got the math right for this reconstruction, which again he called Little Wolf, then you can scan this and you can download his book chapter. And just to honor Bastian's tenure in Lausanne, I saw it. Bastien, if you would like to come up to the stage. See what Eduardo says. You hit the ball out of the park. Right. Yes, congratulations. This comes from baseball. This is a baseball analogy, right? And if the pitcher throws the ball and then the hitter hits the ball so well that it goes out of the park, this happens only every now and then, and so this is something extraordinary if you hit the ball out of the park. And that's what we did with the reconstruction. Wait. You are not off the hook yet. See, so now you have to tell us a little bit about these pictures you're seeing.
That's good, I don't remember. I was a PhD student when you arrived in Lausanne. I was working in kidney, by the way. I was not in bachelor group. And And one day, my computer in the nephrology of the kidneys, broke down, and I was accepted temporarily in the group because Mattias was happy to leave the computer, and I never left since. Be careful, guys. And every time it's on computer, it's very hard to get it. Okay, next. I think that everybody must get a bunch of space. Every year we have a wonderful barbecue, and it's a tradition that I post. Every single place. Is that me? That's the retreat that basically in France. That's in your country. It's the last pregnancy. Yeah, exactly. This one. Oh, that's with this character and there. Yeah, it's a dommage in English. Dommage. Yeah, it's not a shit. It's a dommage. Unfortunately. It's unfortunate he's not here because I could make some jokes. But there's some very fruitful and powerful discussion. And yeah, actually, I'm very reminiscent to him because I was always years we had some fights at the time because I was not satisfied. Because you were right and he was right. Yeah. But I don't know the information from him or the article at the beginning of the series, and it's how I entered into the video.
I find this picture is beautiful because it shows that, generally you do first program this reconstruction engine, and then who adds your part, which is actually quite substantial to this, right? Together you put this into the recon. This one,
it's here. It was last year. I'm going to give the picture. But that was my presentation at the desk. And that was in the eating dinner on the beach where we will, I hope, be able to reproduce the weather allows. And I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I really hope it will not rain. That was a nice week. That was a nice evening.
Okay, and this one, I will comment on that. I thought this exemplifies very well that one man's loss is another man's gain. Right? So he is leading here on that picture into the ocean. So it means he leaves Lausanne, but on the other hand, he enters Bordeaux right here. I think it's where is it? The Stuber, I think, is the beach where this was acquired. So we don't really lose Bastien. He's still in the fold. He's still part of the collaboration, which I find is beautiful. And now I would like to invite Isabel to the stage. I think she has something to share with us. I hope the card and the little, don't worry, I don't keep it.
First version, you can extend it later.
Yeah, so you have a voucher to extend it.
Actually, you can just. Oh my god. Wow. That's my good chapter. They did a filter version. And it's a really, really nice. Hello.
All right, and I don't get any hot water. All right, back back to more serious business. Luckily, Chris, who is also here in the room, then picked up on the FIS sequence. He optimized it, and now he is able to generate such images after gadolinium granted. But look good these images look, how well the fat is now saturated. So it includes an intrinsic fat saturation, and after gadolinium, these images just look magnificent. And pre-GAD, they also start looking better and better with all the bells and whistles we are able to include into this reconstruction. And if you think about our free-running framework, then you really can plug in different things to enrich it, to make it better, to take it to the next level. For instance, such a trajectory is going to be implemented by Cyril. Then the FIS module is now there. As you could see, the UTE image for looking at high flow velocities to still visualize the anatomy is part of it. Then Simba, I think Ludovica is going to talk about an improved version of Simba, and I put the little wolf right next to it because it's now a central part of our reconstruction. Then self-navigation, as already mentioned, with different flavors, with different shades, including the pilot tone, is now part of this free-running framework, which clearly promotes simplicity and is highly modular and dynamic because we could add more things. And also motion fields have now been added to improve the image quality in terms of SNR, both by Bastien on the one hand and by Chris on the other hand. And I also would like to acknowledge Augustin, who put this all together into a Git depository where now everybody can switch off and on these different flags to use these different bells and whistles for their reconstruction. And finally, what I also would like to show you is this image here. These were images collected at a low field system. I think low field is important simply because of a worldwide dissemination of this wonderful technique, MRI. These low field systems are cheaper. They're much easier to site. They have zero boil off, so you don't have to helium refill them. But of course, the lower B0 comes with a lower signal to noise, and things have to be done in order to account for it on the one hand. On the other hand, if you think about cardiac MR and these systems going into places where they haven't had traditionally access to MRI, these people are not going to be educated to find these complicated short axes after 15 minutes, right? So they really need a push button technique to look at the heart, to get some important information out of it. And we believe, of course, that one version of this free running framework would be the solution to that problem. And luckily, Xavier, who is also here in the room, was going to Ohio State University for a few weeks. And he implemented our free running framework on that system. As you can see here, it's not quite up to snuff yet when compared to 2D, but it's getting there, and it hasn't been yet reconstructed with all the bells and whistles, which you can see on the right-hand side, or with denoising from Aurélien, for instance. So I think there is a lot of potential in there to make a single click cardiac MR exam at low field. And with that, I also think that on this low field system, and Aurélie and I will write a specific game on a grant while I'm here the next week to also interject this T1 row mapping, because this may be a way for infarct characterization without any contrast agent. So I think that's the next step we would like to pursue together. Okay. And I think what Leonardo has to say is that the low field actually, together with the free running framework, is something that goes well together, that pairs well. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I would like to thank the team, which you can see here in the background. And I'm sorry I took a little bit longer, but I think I owed it to Bastien to interject a little farewell note, or welcome note as it were, because he arrives at the Lyric here in Bordeaux. Thank you very much.